We're also at a stage now where we're in roles where we're subordinate to the AI. So for example, Amazon uses AI to manage its warehouse employees and ensure that they're as efficient as possible. And you'll see Meituan uses AI to manage its 6 million delivery riders.
Maybe someday the GMAT exam will put some humor questions in their exam.
A future where AI is managing things, that I don't view as dystopian because that's already happening. A future where people aren't telling any jokes at all, that seems particularly dystopian.
Welcome to the HKUST MBA Superconnector Podcast. In this episode, I speak with Professor Brad Bitterly. Brad is a member of our management department. He teaches negotiations in our MBA program. He's also one of the world's leading experts on the topic of humor in business and has been doing cutting-edge research on artificial intelligence in the workplace. Stick with this podcast and you're going to learn about how humans perceive being managed by AI. We'll also talk about what this means as we move toward a world where humans are collaborating with AI and we're trying to have humans in the loop. We'll also explore the use of humor as a leadership skill. I had a great time with this podcast. I hope you'll have a great time listening to our conversation. Brad, thanks for joining us for this podcast. Really looking forward to this chance to get to know you better. And I wanted to start by going back in time. So you had spent a couple of years with Bridgewater before pivoting into business research. Would love to hear more about that. How did you get interested in management research and how have you picked the topics that you've worked on? How did you find your way to HKUST?
Of course, yeah. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here. So the journey, I guess, started in undergrad. I learned I really liked psychology and was a psychology major, but also took a lot of economics classes. I realized I was fascinated by trying to understand how people made their decisions. So then afterwards, I worked for a few years and I worked at Bridgewater Associates and it was a good learning experience. It taught me that what I was really interested in was more management and trying to understand the decisions that people make, even more so than finance. Given that Bridgewater has a very unique culture and it operates by Ray Dalio's principles and it believes in complete transparency, which I think is really good for me. I think it was kind of a distraction because I was more interested in psychology and why is management making the decisions it's making. I want to actually study behavioral economics and specifically the managerial implications. So after that, I went and got my PhD at Wharton and their decision processes group and started to conduct initial research. And the first topics I was looking at were humor, because that was the other thing that a lot of my research focuses on communication and trust. And that was another thing I think where working really was helpful and being at Bridgewater was really helpful. Prior to that, being a geek and being a nerd at each stage of education, I just thought, okay, I just have to get the best grades. I just have to do really well. And then everything's going to work out well in life. And then it was kind of a shocking experience for me that after then getting into the workforce, nobody cares about your grades after you get the job. It helps you get your foot in the door, absolutely. But then as soon as day one, you start working, all that prior effort, like that primary school, secondary school, college, all those prior years of grades, no one cares about anymore. And it's just how you're actually doing at work. And then it was also eye-opening that a lot of things that traditional education doesn't focus on, like communication skills, how do you develop a relationship with someone else, those really matter a lot. And oftentimes it seems even more so than, say, objective performance, because there are some jobs where you can measure objective performance, but there's also a lot where it's kind of iffy. And then you see that, oh, actually cultivating strong relationships with my colleagues, getting other people within the organization to trust me. For example, if management gets employees to really trust them and gets them to see themselves as part of the same community, really, really powerful and extends beyond just, say, the objective performance of the company. So that's where those interests really, really started. I think I started with humor research because that was also top of mind, because I also noticed that it really shapes the way that other people really view you and can have effects that other people don't anticipate. Thinking back about Bridgewater again, I remember there was one day I was in a horrible mood and there was one of one of the managers just said, bitterly, what's your problem? And then I don't know why, but out of nowhere, I just pulled out a reference to Animal House, a very obscure one. That I just said, oh, I've been really bummed ever since my fiance, Fawn Leibowitz, died in that kiln explosion. He burst out laughing and just completely let me go. Like he didn't return back to, and I was in a bad mood that day. If anything, like his frustration was warranted, but it just kind of shocked me that, wait, this can be a get out of jail free card and it can be really, really powerful. So that stuck with me. And then I did my initial research onto humor. And then that led to me becoming more broadly interested in communication and trust as well. And then as far as what brought me to HKUST was then after Wharton, I did a postdoc at Michigan, and then I was on the academic job market, and I had offers from here and from UCL, University College London, and I had to the point about the importance of relationships. I had a good friend, Martha Jung, in the management department here that I had known for a long time. And I think that really tipped the scales that I figured if I was moving abroad, having a close friend in the department would help a lot. And then beyond that, I mean, loved the school. I really enjoyed my visit. Hong Kong's amazing. The management department here is phenomenal. And the fact that the entire visit, even my parents said afterwards, they said it was one of the visits where it was the visit I had where afterwards I just sounded very, very happy at the end of it. So that ultimately ended up bringing me here.
Glad to have you here.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating that you talked about the relationship side and learning about humor and exploring that at Bridgewater Associates, which I would have just without any other thinking just said investment fund, all about decision making and sort of logical decision making. So was that just like an isolated incident, or was that a broader kind of theme that you sort of picked up there?
Notice it more broadly. I think it's like most workplaces, people joke around with each other. There'll be ongoing jokes. I mean, people will send their jokes to the listserv. There was a place where people could post things that they were selling internally that sometimes would lead to humorous remarks. But overall, yeah, like even a place that really prioritizes logical decision making, you would see people joking around because I think that it's underweight how important that is because that influences if you're happy on a day-to-day basis. And if you really have those connections to your colleagues, I think that particularly has a really strong impact on whether or not you like showing up to work, like how dedicated you are to the company. So I think those dynamics, even at a place that really emphasizes logic, do occur and should occur.
I was just reviewing some of the Bridgewater website and Ray's principles and noting that on that list, he was talking about relationships as an important part of his principles. So very interesting.
He would emphasize, that he like the goal is to view it as a family, and it's I think trying to instill that dynamic anywhere, like any organization, is super important because it has benefits to productivity. You don't have to monitor your employees as much. Like if people really do view themselves as part of the same group, you don't have to like be as heavy-handed. Because if people really do feel a strong sense of commitment. So I think those dynamics are great. They really work on cultivating that at Bridgewater. I wasn't as interested in the particular work I was doing. I discovered I thought the psychology of management was much more fascinating than bond yields. But at the same time, I know plenty of people there that would view what I'm doing now not so fun and much prefer what they're doing. So I think I left because of the nature of work, but I do think those dynamics as far as building relationships, building trust with your colleagues, having fun with them are important. And you see it at Bridgewater, and I think it's important for all organizations.
And now you're doing work on management and AI, which I'm very timely. We're all asking questions about this. You recently had published in the Journal of Applied Psychology some research on benevolence and artificial intelligence. You've got some active research projects on the perception of AI users, working with generative AI, and so forth. Wonder if we can start and if you could just tell us a little bit about your research on benevolence and trust in AI, and also, how you got into that and what you're learning from that research.
Yeah, of course. I think that's where getting involved in that research, it's been timely. And I think what really helped with that, there's two actually things that helped with that. So my PhD student, Mingyu Li, she led that project. And when she started, she's now finished her 4th year. So when she started 4 years ago, she was saying she was really interested in AI and AI management. And being in my late 30s, I was saying, I don't know a lot about AI, but I know a lot about trust. And it led to a merging of our interests. And I think what's really unique about HKUST and why it was beneficial being here is that China really was ahead of the US and in many ways is ahead of the US as far as using AI in its day-to-day life. Like she was showing me photos when I said, are people really managed by AI? She'd point out and say, oh, well, like at hotels, you don't even have a person delivering things anymore. You can see examples of AI bots all throughout society in China. So I think her unique perspective from that really helped. And then I also think with this new technology, listening to younger people is really helpful because they do see the trends. So there she recognized that, okay, AI is becoming more common. And then we were discussing, all right, so how can we examine trust of AI? And then as we thought about it more, as we explored it more, we realized that historical research on AI and on technology had really explored the ability angle of technology. There's this model called the technology acceptance model. And for much of human history, it made sense. The basic premise is that humans are more likely to use a new technology if they can see how it's beneficial. So does it help them? And if it's easy to use. Very simple, very straightforward, makes complete sense. That influenced a lot of research where people started to examine, okay, is it really beneficial? And really started to examine its competence and capability. So if you would accept and be open to a AI radiologist, the perspective was driven by, well, how competent do you think the AI is relative to the human? And there's been people like Berkeley Deep Force that has done a lot of great research showing that people historically have been less forgiving of technology when it makes a mistake than people, because we think people can actually learn from their mistakes. We think that technology can't. And that was true for a lot of history. But now we have advanced AI with reinforcement learning that can actually learn very quickly. And the other thing that's really important to note that we're starting to witness within organizations is that we're now at a time where AI is starting to replace humans, and not in the prior sense that it's increasing efficiency and reducing the number of people that are necessary. It's literally starting to fulfill roles that were filled by people. So now it's replacing humans, it's interacting with other humans in those roles. And we're also at a stage now where we're in roles where we're subordinate to the AI. So for example, Amazon uses AI to manage its warehouse employees and ensure that they're as efficient as possible. And you'll see Meituan uses AI to manage its 6 million delivery riders. And the reasons why make complete sense. A human dispatcher can't manage 6 million delivery riders. AI absolutely can. But despite this, we noticed there was a lot of pushback towards this technology being implemented, where there were negative press articles and both in China and in the US, where people were condemning Meituan and condemning Amazon for using this technology and saying, oh, the AI management is really abusive, it's horrible. And this got us to really scratch our heads because we started to think, okay, maybe the algorithm's not set correctly, but obviously the AI has no ill intentions. And plus, as far as if the complaint is that the working conditions are overly harsh, that's nothing new to AI. Like that's been going on for all of human history. Like if you, like spoiler alert, if you look up how the Great Pyramids of Giza were built, it was not through positive management, warm, fuzzy working conditions. So given that we've really had the ability to do that, the fact that these working conditions were being attributed to the AI, we started to think, okay, there really appears to be this bias against AI management. So then we went to the theoretical frameworks for trust, and trust is really predicated on a few main dimensions. Ability, which had previously been explored for technology, like how competent you think it is. But then another primary component is benevolence, the extent to which you think the manager and the thing overseeing you really cares about you. And this is where AI has a real disadvantage compared to people because it's a mathematical algorithm. We know it's a mathematical algorithm. And because of that, we infer that it's less kind just because it literally doesn't care about us. And that causes us to view it as less benevolent and causes us to trust it less. So, and we ran some studies exploring that and confirmed that it's the perceived benevolence that's really driving the lack of trust of AI management.
So as you look at the state of AI and management research, what are some of the findings that you're aware of which seem compelling, and what are some of the the big questions that you think researchers should be looking at?
Yeah, of course. So I think one of the findings that we found that are very compelling, absolutely, it has the ability to improve our performance productivity. That's very clear. We're already seeing the advantages it can have. I think that's what's so powerful about this new technology. There's been other technologies, I think, in recent years where people tell us, oh, this is going to completely change the world. And then you're waiting and seeing already, like anyone who uses it for a short amount of time, I think becomes compelled very, very quickly. Okay, this is very powerful. So it's going to improve our productivity. It's going to improve the quality of our output. One thing we have to be cautious, though, of is as we start to replace humans with it, or even start integrating it with humans and getting them to work side by side using human in the loop systems, we need to be careful about how those systems are going to be perceived. So what I mean by that is I have a project right now with my PhD student, Mingyu Lee, and then also in collaboration with David Hagman in the management department, where we're exploring that idea of human in the loop. And theoretically, that should be phenomenal output because yes, AI might have this relational deficit. It doesn't have empathy itself, but humans certainly do. And whereas humans have limited cognitive capabilities, AI is this powerful workhorse. So if you combine them, the output should be better. We've run studies looking at feedback giving. So we had people submit essays where they wrote about an inspirational moment in their life. And then we manipulated whether or not the feedback they got was just from AI, a human in the loop system where the AI is working with a human, or just from a human. What we find is that the AI working with the human does lead to better output. Third-party raters rate it as being more positive, more competent, but the recipients of it rate it as worse than a human just operating alone. And what this is driven by is if you think through how we think, when humans are facing something new, it's not adaptive to just focus on the positives of it. So if you're an employee or you're being told your manager is going to use AI to evaluate you, if you're a student and you're told, oh, well, the professor is going to be using AI to evaluate you, although that certainly can lead to better quality output, and we're finding in our studies it does, as a recipient of that, it's more adaptive to think about the potential limitations. And you're going to think about, okay, what are the weaknesses here? And in our studies, we're finding the actual use of the AI pulls the human down, and people rate the feedback from the human using AI as less warm and they trust it less. Even though third-party raters are rating it as higher quality, the recipients of the feedback are perceiving it as worse. So this is an important thing that we need to really, really assess, because in any system where we implement it, even if the objective performance is better, if the recipients of the output are going to perceive it as worse, that's going to be an issue. And we need to be careful with that. That's also the project where we found that if you amp up the positivity, you can amp up the positivity of the AI. And that's one way to address the warmth gap of humans and AI, but still the output from the human in the loop system and the AI isn't rated as warmer than humans. When it's from third parties objectively warmer than the human is, that can help to compensate for the actual warmth gap.
So, I mean, there's a lot of talk, right, about we need to keep humans in the loop
Yeah.
with AI. And this kind of seems to suggest that even having a human in the loop doesn't make the recipient feel a lot better.
That's what we're finding so far, because right now people are attending to the potential risks that, two primary risks you can have when a human evaluator is using AI. You can think, okay, well, the human could just be lazy. We know that we have a tendency to be lazy. That's just true of everyone. And then in which case, it could just be essentially the output's very similar to the AI output. So I'm not really getting that benefit of the human. So even if it is better quality output, you end up actually viewing it as worse. We were doing these studies as initial studies because then we wanted to actually try it out in our classrooms. And then the initial findings got us to say, okay, we need to do more follow-up studies first to really figure out, okay, what interventions can we do to close this gap? So that way our students aren't viewing us as not caring about them and aren't viewing the actual output as worse. One thing to note, though, as far as practical takeaway, we do find context really matters a lot for when people care about this. And we call them high or low empathy demand contexts. So high empathy demand contexts are situations where you really want a counterpart who's capable, who has emotional capabilities. Example of this from Mingyu in my paper. If you're requesting time off from work because it's just a routine day off or because a family member passed away, if AI responds to you versus a human, if it's just a routine day off and it's just, okay, the day off's approved, have a great day. People don't really care in that situation. If it is a situation like a family member's sick or has passed away, that's going to be a situation where you really want to be mindful, and that's where you really want the human interacting with them. So you can imagine in Hong Kong, say your car license is expiring. That's not a situation where you really need a counterpart who's really capable of empathy. So using AI there, don't foresee any huge backlash for that. But in contrast, I think a clear example, because it brings up visceral responses. On the other hand, if you had a cancer screen and you were either called from an AI agent versus the oncologist or radiologist, that's going to be a case where you really want the human rather than the
Yeah.
AI chatbot.
It's a good reminder to build off of. Situations are different. And for an MBA student, 10 years later, if they're leading a business, leading a team, it's not going to be necessarily a one size fits all answer, right? But really kind
Exactly.
of when to use AI or when to make sure there's a human touch in the management situation.
Exactly. So for practical implications for them, really think through, is it a context where you really need the human touch or not? And then if uncertain, pilot test, like rather than completely rolling out the technology at once, do some initial pilot tests, get some feedback from the employees so that way you can see the initial responses.
Let's go to the other area that you've done a lot of research on, humor, both in thinking about kind of the AI context and how might that impact, right, how we think about humor in the workplace. But even just it feels kind of odd for me as an MBA program director to even say, well, let's talk about humor. When I did my MBA, 20 years ago, didn't really come up as a subject. But tell me, why should business leaders be interested in humor?
So they should be interested in humor. I'm not just saying this from motivated reasoning, from studying it, or just from my own personal anecdote where it personally saved me. It is this pervasive behavior that is part of our day-to-day interactions. We see it all around. Even when I started to research it, I still remember during my PhD, there was a class where we had to exchange each other's papers that we were working on. And we gave feedback to each other. And another student handed mine back and said, I thought when you said you were studying humor, you were joking. And he said, I was shocked to read that there were actual, like, real studies and real theory behind it. So because it's humor, it's part of the mechanism of humor. It can cause us to view things as less true, but it's also something that's very powerful about it. So as far as effects that I've found in my own work, we tend to view people who are funny as more competent. They signal to us that they're more intelligent. We even call them witty. They show that they're confident. And in a lot of social situations, we don't have objective measures of people's competence. So we look for signals of how competent they are. And the person who can tell a funny joke at the right moment, we end up inferring that they're more intelligent, more confident, more competent. And then that causes them to be seen as higher status. And even in experiments, we found that when people had to elect a group leader for a subsequent lab task, it increased the likelihood that someone would get elected to be the group leader for the subsequent task. So it can cause you to be to elevate your status. It can also help you to maintain your status because tied to the fact that people view humorous comments as less true, if you have to disclose negative information about yourself. So from studying negotiations, I'm really interested in the fact that we always tell the truth, but then we're in tons of situations where you can't be completely truthful. So in a negotiation, you can't reveal all of your private information. In an interview, you might not be able to reveal everything. Say you had a bad experience at a prior employer. Even if it's the prior employer's fault, you can't say that in the interview or else you'll be seen as bad-mouthing a prior employer, and that could be harmful. So the great thing about humor is it enables you to respond to questions, but in a way that people are less likely to infer what you're saying is true. And because of that, you can respond and disclose negative information, but without harming perceptions of your competence and how likable you are. So in our study, we gave an example of someone interviewing where they either disclose a weakness in their math ability and said, oh, my greatest weakness is math. I can add and subtract, but I struggle with geometry. Or they said a joke where they said, I can add and subtract, but geometry is where I draw the line. Not the best joke, but it still caused the counterpart and the participants to infer the person wasn't really being serious. And they viewed them as more competent, because of that, viewed the person as more competent and more likable when they disclose using humor. It has these really powerful effects where you can elevate your status, you can maintain it. Ronald Reagan used it effectively when he was running for re-election. There were concerns about his mental fitness. He was going to be the oldest president running for election at the time. And during one of the debates, when the moderator asked him, are you concerned about your age. His response was, I'm not going to make you, no, I'm not going to make age an issue of this election. I'm not going to hold my opponent's youth and inexperience against him. Yeah. And even his opponent, Mondale, burst out laughing and he won re-election. Mondale said that was the moment he knew he lost. And this was a very serious issue in a very public forum, and no one returned back to the issue. And in hindsight, we know that he was showing early stages of dementia, but people just completely forgot about it. So it's this great tool that can help you elevate your status, can help you maintain it. Now, we have found there is cultural variation. So Ren Lee, who's at Hong Kong PolyU, and myself, we run studies where we were kind of confused about the fact that the humor literature portrays China as this place that doesn't value humor at all. It says, oh, it's a Confucian society where it values sincerity, whereas Western society really being more individualistic, values people trying to stand out. So as a result, humor can help in Western context, not in Eastern context. Yeah, anyone who's here can obviously see that's not true. It's not a society that's void of any humor. So there we ran some studies where we looked at using humor to warn employees. And what we found is that because humor is indirect communication, you're not as explicitly saying something. It can actually be more beneficial for Chinese managers than for managers in the US. Because whereas with US managers, if someone does something wrong and they tell a joke about it, people aren't certain, wait, is the manager just joking around during a serious time? Are they trying to make themselves look good rather than really being an effective manager? Whereas with Chinese managers, being a more indirect form of communication, it's perceived more as they're not doing it for themselves. They're doing it to help the employee save face, and yet they're still conveying the warning. So here we're saying that it can be powerful across cultures. We're just starting to explore all the differences of where it's used, but it can be universally beneficial, which is why I think as we start to use AI more and more, it's a very, very human behavior. And I think it will be important that we continue to use it. A future where AI is managing things, that I don't view as dystopian because that's already happening. A future where people aren't telling any jokes at all, that seems particularly dystopian. But again, it's an area where we'll need to test because as the point that you brought up earlier, AI telling people jokes, I think it will get better at training on our own individual sense of humor and being able to tell us things that we think are funny. But what prior research on laughter has found, Provine did great research on laughter in the 90s. We're more likely to laugh when we're in the presence of another person than we are when we're alone. So I think AI will get better at telling us the jokes that we want to hear. That being said, it's still not going to be a substitute for human connection. Yeah. And another person actually telling us jokes will actually still be a more powerful effect.
This point about human connection. So especially here in Hong Kong and with our MBA program, we're often trying to help people connect with people that are different from them. So business student with an engineer or a science expert, or East meets West, right? Someone from the US or the UK with a Chinese student from Chengdu, or, So humor. Any thoughts on using humor as a way to connect, especially across cultures?
Yeah. So from witnessing in the classroom, I think it absolutely can be effective. I think hedging more towards self-deprecating humor is a safer option because unless you have a clear idea of what the boundaries are, and still, even if you're trying to break down, say, in-group bias and get everyone to view each other as part of the same group, making fun of another group is particularly risky. It's one of those things that other humor researchers and I, we were working on a project and we talked about this recently. It's kind of like the phenomenon, my siblings and I can make fun of my parents. Like you can't, like targeting another group and jumping in on if another, like, say the European students are making fun of the EU. As an American, if I jump in and start piling on, that's riskier because I'm not a member of the in-group. But on the flip side, as far as a safer route, and this is something I'll do in class, instead actually doing more self-deprecating humor, like making fun of the US, like using it as an example of that, I think can be a safer way to actually tell jokes and then use it as a way for people to actually get more unified, actually talking. And then it also can be an effective tool for talking about more sensitive topics in a more relaxed way. That's where, Mark Twain is considered one of the most brilliant writers to this day because he was able to tackle really, really sensitive, important topics using humor. So I think similarly, we can use it as far as using it to connect with other students and things like that. When in doubt, like really test out the jokes. If you have a close friend who's from like another group and you think it's potentially edgy, be careful because humor can be risky. And someone who says a completely inappropriate joke, we don't think, oh, wow, they're witty. We think, man, I can't believe they said that.
Yeah.
What were they thinking? So again, earlier point I made, pilot test.
Yep.
Professional comedians do that all the time. We think of humor being this spontaneous, off the cuff event, but the people who are really good at it practice it a lot. So if you're thinking about using it at a multicultural presentation, if you're thinking about like what jokes you could actually say that could really land, like if your group is mostly composed of people from a different background, run it by a close friend that can actually help inform you. Okay, that's going to be safe. That won't be even a joke that you might think is funny. There's cultural differences, might not land. So you can also get a better sense from that. So practice a lot. And the other part is, when in doubt, hedge more towards self-deprecation because then at least it can open up the communication, set people at ease. And then especially if people are hesitant to actually discuss at first, it could potentially open up the doors and put people in a more relaxed, more creative mood.
Very insightful. We can go on on this topic, and I'm sure in class with you, there's a lot of chance to explore these topics. But I can see just the humor, and it's maybe someday the GMAT exam will put some humor questions in their exam. So just to wrap up, any favorite jokes to share with us?
Oh, so I think this highlights the risk, and this is a joke I don't tell to students, but I think it really exemplifies how one of the things about humor is people who have the same sense of humor, you kind of identify your same group. And growing up, our family always had a very dry, dark sense of humor. In fact, even preparing for this, I was curious and I typed into Gemini and I was like, oh, what's my sense of humor? And it's like, it's a little bit absurd and it's dry and it's dark. And I thought, okay, that actually sounds very, very accurate. But in our family, but my parents have a very dry and dark sense of humor. And there was a case where my mother, when I was really little, had ovarian cancer. And already you can tell it's a great setup for a joke, great topic. But she fortunately completely okay. The surgery went well, removed it. She hasn't had any issues for years. But she was talking with my dad about it. Someone was asking her about it in public, and she was making fun of my dad, saying, "Oh, I could tell you're really, really nervous because on the way to the hospital, you let me listen to country music and you never let me listen to country music." And his response was, "I wasn't nervous. I just thought it would be the last time I'd have to listen to it." The reason I bring up this example is as far as testing out the humor, pilot testing it, knowing your audience, my mother thought that was hilarious. Our family has a perspective, dark humor is the way you cope with really, really bad events. It's literally staring something tragic in its face and laughing at it is the way that you actually show that you're not afraid of it. But that wasn't the interpretation of other people at that event. And other people thought my father was horrible. Like, how could he make such comments to my mother? So keep in mind, it's all relative. It can be a risky behavior. And I think it's a great example of how, as you're trying to build super connectors, something tells me that the people who are really good at bridging multiple cultures, multiple groups are already very aware of this. But as you're starting to do it, realize that the way things, even a perfectly well-intentioned joke that the recipient views as hilarious, and in fact, in the case of my parents, that sense of humor is why they got married, could be interpreted by third parties as not the same way. So it's not completely objective. It is in the eye of the beholder. So really practice your jokes, get a sense from other people. And this could be an area where I wouldn't be surprised if, as far as safe environments to test it out, as we do have AI that's trained in various cultures, such as like DeepSeek, we know is trained on Chinese data. I could see in the future that's also a way you could test the waters and say, hey, I have a talk coming up in Shenzhen. This is a joke I'm thinking about saying. Is this an appropriate joke in that context? So, but key thing is practice. Can even use AI to practice. But again, make sure it's trained in the culture that you're thinking about actually using the joke rather than say one that is not.
Yeah, we often think of these kind of soft skills as maybe being easy, but in a sense, they're really hard.
They're really hard, and no one. As I was saying before, what got me interested in straight out of undergrad, I would not have predicted I'd be teaching negotiations. I knew I was interested in psychology, but it was literally from starting to work and realizing, oh, wait, these are the game changers. This is what makes a huge difference. Don't get me wrong, CEOs are frequently very smart, but they're as, if not more important, very good interpersonal skills, very good at relating to others. And we don't have enough classes that teach that. And we're going to need more of them as the more say quant heavy, as the more routine tasks start to be replaced by AI, we're going to need those interpersonal skills more.
Like some people are fond of saying the future of work will be more human, not less.
I think that's right. I think maybe it's just from being a geek. I don't think it will completely replace, but I think the people that are high on both are going to be the ones who are ultimately rewarded. So I don't think that it's going to go from where the person who can't even add 2 + 2 is going to become CEO of Goldman. I find that you still need to be able to understand if the output of the AI is accurate.
Yep.
But whereas previously in recruiting, say we gave more weight to the more just quantitative test results, I see that shifting. And to your point about will we include things like humor on the GRE, I wouldn't be surprised by that, where given that those types of skills are going to be more important, I think we'll probably incorporate it more into assessments and then have more classes teaching it, because that's going to be the weight that we'll have to give it will be more and more important.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks a lot, Brad, for joining us on this episode. And I hope that you get a chance to meet some of our listeners in the future as well in the classroom. Thanks for listening to this episode of the HKUST MBA Superconnector Podcast. If you would like to learn more about Professor Bitterly's research, please check the show notes where we have links to a Harvard Business Review article he wrote on humor and a recent research article he wrote on artificial intelligence and the role of trust by humans. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd encourage you to subscribe or follow so you can stay tuned for our next episode. And if you would like to learn more about our HKUST MBA program and hear from other professors, alumni, and students, please do visit our website at mba.hkust.edu.hk. See you next time.